She's a superstar in every way.
I think that if I did the kind of single ladies dance where you're like,
Yeah.
I mean, people know that.
Yes.
And that is incredible.
But boy, she knows how to spend it, doesn't she? In
Oh,
2023, her and Jay-Z spent $200 million for a Malibu beachfront mansion, which we think is the highest price ever paid for a property in California.
A young girl, just 9 years old, sweats under the sweltering Texas sun. She is running, she's pounding the pavement along the edge of the Bayou River.
5 other girls trail behind her. They're all singing at the top of their lungs, harmonizing as they go, but none of the girls are hitting the high notes quite like our lead.
Because this little girl is Beyoncé, and she will leave everyone in the dust on her journey to becoming a billionaire.
Welcome to Good Bad Billionaire from the BBC World Service. Each episode we pick a billionaire and find out how they made their money.
We take them from zero to their first million, and then from a million onto a billion.
I'm Simon Jack, the BBC's business editor.
And I'm Zing Singh. I'm a journalist, author, and podcaster.
And this week, probably one of the top cultural figures of the 21st century.
Oh, yeah. And probably the 20th century as well. I mean, we are starting this season with a bang.
Have you seen her live?
I've seen her live. I've actually seen her live 3 times, and I was trying to count how much money I've spent on Beyoncé in the last 15 years. Yeah. I reckon probably almost $1,000
£1,000
seeing her
okay.
live.
Because tickets don't come cheap, do they? And that is one of the reasons that in 2025, Beyoncé was declared a billionaire worth exactly $1 billion.
From the very beginning, Beyoncé has embodied professionalism, perfection, power. I mean, you just need to listen to her voice to know that.
And capitalism, let's not forget about that. Ambition, materialism, capitalism, all being pretty overt in some of her lyrics. From her first hit with Destiny's Child, Bills, Bills, Bills.
It's a tune.
Okay. To declaring herself, and I like this quote, a black Bill Gates in the making on 2016's Lemonade.
Yes, you can listen to the Bill Gates episode to decide if she really is the black Bill Gates. But Beyoncé is the CEO of what she calls, and I love this, her multi-purpose badass conglomerate. But really, this is a story about an artist who made money from making music.
Which is pretty rare. And I like the multi-purpose badass conglomerate. Remember Jay-Z, who will feature in this story for obvious reasons. He said, I'm not a businessman, I'm a business, man.
So what does it take to make $1 billion and become Queen Bee? Let's travel back to find out.
Yes, Beyoncé Knowles was born in 1981 in Houston, Texas, in the USA. Her father, Matthew, worked at Xerox selling medical equipment. Her mother, Tina, owned a hair salon that, according to Matthew, made them their first $1 million before Beyoncé was even born. She said, I went to private school, we had a very nice house, we had cars, we had a housekeeper. You can actually Google her family home. It's pretty nice, grand-looking white house, 5,000 square feet, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a swimming pool. So nice.
Beyoncé grew up comfortable, and everyone describes her when she was growing up as someone who was quiet, who was shy. Her parents actually put Beyoncé in a dance class because she was too shy. And the story goes is that when Beyoncé was 7, her dance teacher, a woman called Darlette, noticed that she could sing and said, it blew me away. I told her to sing again, and because she was very shy, I promised her $1, and she sang it again. Interesting incentive for Beyoncé there. And Darlette then entered Beyoncé into a talent show, and when she got up, she absolutely commanded the stage. And her mum, Tina, who will come up again in the story, says it was something that happened on that stage I had never seen before.
Yeah.
Beyoncé won first class. She took home a trophy, $100. So that was the beginning of her journey.
Isn't it funny? Because I remember one of our other billionaires, the minute they took to the stage, somebody saw something. Rihanna, remember that one?
Exactly.
And said, wow, there's something special there. So from then on, singing and dancing became part of her, central to her life. According to Darlette, Beyoncé's parents worked pretty hard developing her. They got her a vocal coach. With Matthew and Tina's permission, Darlette said she was dragging her all over town to dance competitions and pageants and stuff like that. Age 9, she moved schools to Parker Elementary, which is kind of specialised in music and dance. And her younger sister Solange said Beyoncé practiced in her bedroom over and over and over again. And when everyone said, okay, that's good, we've got it, she would say, no, I want to do it again. So very driven perfectionism.
Exactly. So you might ask yourself, where did this work ethic come from? Beyoncé credits her parents. She said, both were entrepreneurs. I watched them struggle working 18-hour days. They taught me that nothing worth having comes easily. And in particular, her dad, Matthew Knowles, stressed discipline. He was really tough on her. But Beyonce has said, I wasn't doing this because I didn't have a choice or to support the family, important for child entertainers, or because I had to get out of a bad situation. I was just determined this is what I wanted to do so bad.
Okay, so she was making a name for herself in the local community, winning competitions. One day in the hair salon, two local mothers, Denise and Deborah, approached the Knowleses and they said, listen, we want to form a young version of En Vogue, which was a band at the time. In 1990, we're out here, groups were big at the time. There was a gap in the market for a younger version of that. So Beyonce became the first member of a band called Girls Tyme, spelled Tyme. I like that everything has to be kind of slightly off because it was En Vogue, In Sync, Girls Tyme with a
Kids
Y.
bop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So we put a team in place, a financial backer, producer, songwriter. They trialed 30 girls, 6 were finally selected for the band. They had intense rehearsals. They practiced nearly every day for months at their family home, Beyonce's family home. The girls did a regular boot camp as per our opening scene, if you remember, running down the river by the bayou.
And they traveled to the West Coast to record their first record, but tensions were already showing. So those involved have said that Beyonce's dad, Matthew, was trying to position her as the lead, although Matthew obviously disputes this portrayal of himself. It's worth noting that there were a lot of people involved at this point, all of whom were developing Girls Tyme for months on end. That's not particularly unusual when it comes to girl bands or boy bands. It's estimated that back then this would have cost around $100,000 because it is expensive. You're working with a lot of people. So the band needed to sign a deal, but their producer was shopping the record around major labels for about a year. They had no success, and their last hope was a popular TV talent show called Star Search, quite similar to, I guess, X Factor or Pop Idol today.
Yeah, like an early version of that. At the time, it was the largest national talent show. Child stars who've been on Star Search included some big names, actually. Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera. They practiced for over a month. They got tight. They got polished. They were up against an adult male rock band called Skeleton Crew. I can sort of picture that band. And Beyonce said, I hadn't even thought about imagining losing as a possibility.
But lose they did, and this whole process of losing Star Search caused also a deep rift within the band. Ashley left. Soon the producers, songwriters also parted ways. And this left the stage clear for Matthew Knowles. He quit his job to manage the band full-time. This is a guy who's probably pretty high up, and he just goes, I'm just going to quit to manage my daughter's band.
Well, they must have been absolutely convinced that they had a star on their hands because, as you say, it's not like this was their only hope. They had a very comfortable life. They both had good jobs. And to pack it in, particularly after losing this, at that point you'd say, oh, well, nice try. It's not going to be, but they doubled down on this. More girls left. They brought another one in. The band changed its name. And one former member, Latavia, said, Matthew did not mince his words, she said, and it can be tough to take that kind of criticism when you are a little girl. We would try not to let it break us. Shades of like the Jackson 5 almost in this, isn't it? Like tough, whatever. Maybe not quite as extreme as that, but a high-pressure environment.
Definitely, especially for young girls, right? And also, it's worth noting things were not going very well for Beyonce at this point. The Knowles were also having financial problems because, as we said, their dad quit the job to manage them. The family had to move out of that lovely house. The parents even split up for 6 months. Though, in the personal stakes, Beyonce's life was not going particularly well.
But then came one of those moments in our stories which basically changed everything. And what's in a name? Well, quite a lot, because this band changed its name to Destiny's Child, and Destiny beckoned.
Very good.
Yeah, 4 years earlier, Beyonce had met an A&R, that's artists from repertoire. They're the kind of people responsible for finding talent, called Teresa La Barbera White. Teresa was keen on her, but couldn't convince her label to sign the act. Fast forward to 1996, Beyonce's now 14. Teresa has got a new job at Columbia Records. It's part of Sony. So Matthew calls her up, and this time she does manage to convince the label. And Destiny's Child, in fact, is her first signing.
Their first single, No, 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 which is an incredible song, by the way. Major hit, peaking at number 3 on the US Billboard chart. But the album only made number 67. Now, this failure probably was a blessing in a way. Beyonce has said the label didn't really believe we were pop stars. They underestimated us, and because of that, they allowed us to write our own songs write our own video treatments. It ended up being the best thing because that's when I became an artist and I took control.
That's fascinating, isn't it? So they didn't think they were going to be a big enough deal to micromanage them, so they let them kind of do their own thing. And the album thing is interesting because in the mid to late 90s, album sales are still where a lot of the money comes from.
It's huge.
It's huge. It's not like now you get one streaming or two streaming hits, whatever. Album sales were kind of like the bulk of your earnings.
Well, in 1999, Destiny's Child took that artistic freedom and they brought out an album which became critically acclaimed, something called The Writings on the Wall. Do you know any songs from this era?
I think, am I right in saying that Say My Name is on this album?
Absolutely.
Oh, there we go.
So, Say My Name,
I got
Jumping,
one.
Jumping, Bills, Bills, Bills.
Okay.
Hugely influential pop songs, which actually, great music videos that still stand up.
Okay. And it sold 8 million copies, 3 number one singles. But often with these kind of confected pop bands, in a way, the band was actually at war. So members Latavia and Latoya filed a lawsuit against Beyonce's dad and the group, alleging he stole their money and threw them out of the group when they tried to seek new personal terms. In fact, they only found out they'd been sacked when they watched the video for Say My Name and saw 2 new members lip-syncing to their voices.
Ouch.
Oh, that is brutal, isn't it? This is a bit like the guy who played Darth Vader, who didn't realise that his voice had been replaced by James Earl Jones until he actually saw the film.
That's gotta hurt.
Anyway, but Matthew said the allegations are totally untrue. He also said that he owned the name Destiny's Child as a Texas corporation, and therefore he could decide who the members are. Perhaps legally that's right. The lawsuit was settled out of court later that year.
So by the third album, there were just 3 members of Destiny's Child. The ones that we all know, Beyonce, Kelly, a new girl called Michelle, and their 2001 album, Survivor, was Beyonce's very first number 1 album. The title and the lyrics were actually about the band's turmoil. So there's a line in there that says, "You thought I wouldn't sell without you, sold 9 million."
Oof.
I always thought when I was growing up that was about a nasty ex-boyfriend who didn't believe in Beyonce or the rest of the girls. But actually, it's about all this internal struggle going on within the band at the time. And also by that point, by the way, there was no denying this was the Beyonce show. She was front and center. She was also getting major writing and production credits on the album, which we know from the Taylor Swift episode is so crucial to making money.
Yeah.
And Survivor, so 10 million, that's a lot. But it's always tricky to find out exactly how much money artists are making from their music.
Yeah. In 2016, entertainment website The Jasmine Brand reported on the terms of the original deal Destiny's Child signed with Sony. Apparently, they got an $85,000 advance for the first album. The second album, they would get between $350 and $700, similar amounts for the third, and so on. And their royalty rates were set at 28% for the first album, but the rates would rise if an album sold over 500,000 copies. However, and this is fairly standard, all the money the label paid to cover producer fees and promotion marketing would be recouped by Sony from the album profits.
So we don't know if the advances were split equally. Latavia and Latoya have claimed that they weren't.
Yeah.
But it's hard to be at this stage sure if Beyonce had personally made $1 million. In order to do that, Beyonce needs to go solo. So at the end of 2001, Destiny's Child announces a hiatus. She's only 21 at this stage. She's on her own. Beyonce releases a collaboration with a rapper, the man who would later on become her husband, Jay-Z. And according to Beyonce, she was not flush with cash at the beginning of their relationship. She says, "We used calling cards and Skype when we were falling in love. I couldn't afford the international hotel bills, so I would literally get international calling cards to call him."
Okay, famously expensive, those phone calls from your hotel room. At this point, though, Beyonce started diversifying her revenue stream. Now, that sounds all very businesslike in my comfort zone. She's starting to cash in on sponsorship. She replaced Britney Spears as the face of Pepsi. She's dipping her toe into acting. She starred in an MTV made-for-TV film, Carmen, a hip opera. Grown, and then the big screen as Foxy Cleopatra in Austin Powers Gold Member. I don't remember that.
I remember this. And she also did a song for it from memory.
Did she?
A song which is quite good, I think, but,
Yeah.
forgotten to the mists of time.
But things are about to get really big for her.
Exactly. So things exploded in 2003 when she released her debut solo album, Dangerously in Love. It debuted at number 1 in the States. It earned her 5 Grammy Awards, and it was a truly global hit. In fact, she became the first female artist and the fifth artist ever to simultaneously top both the singles charts and the album charts in the US and the UK. That is really, really difficult. And most importantly, for Beyoncé's journey to a billion, Dangerously in Love became one of the best-selling albums of the 21st century.
Wow.
So between this, the acting jobs, the Pepsi gig, it feels fair to say that Beyoncé is a millionaire in 2003 at the age of 22.
Just 22.
Okay, so Beyoncé is now a millionaire, and next up, we're going to track her journey onto a billion.
But we've got a long way to go to get from a million to a billion. A billion is 1,000 million for new listeners, just to remind you of that. So as much as we both love the music, I think you know it better than I. We're going to have to fast forward to the next few albums, which are?
B-Day.
Is it short for birthday or
Yes.
Beyonce Day?
Well, I think both, actually.
Okay, got it.
Then there's I Am, ...
Yeah.
Sasha Fierce, and Four.
Yeah.
And I think you will know the big hits from this.
I want to say Single Lady, Crazy in Love. We're not there yet, are we?
No, we are. So singles from the albums, Irreplaceable. Do you
Yeah.
know that one?
If
You will
if
probably
don't
hum
hum it for copyright reasons. We mustn't sort of go there because we'll get sued or probably.
Exactly. So Irreplaceable, Ring the Alarm,
Okay, yeah.
Single Ladies.
Single Ladies.
Yeah,
Now that I do know.
Exactly.
I love that tune. And also I think it was the absolute one of the standout videos of all time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If I Were a Boy,
No.
Run the World, Girls.
I'm sure, like I say, you know, if you sang it, which you're not allowed to, so I'm getting a massive F on this one. But lots of people did know them, and they sold tons.
Yeah, so we can say that they amassed over 75 million album sales worldwide.
That's astonishing. But we're interested also in Beyoncé, the businesswoman, and she has said men often have the luxury of being perceived as the strategists, the brains behind their ventures. They're given the space to focus on the product, the team, the business plan. Women, on the other hand, especially those in the limelight, are frequently pigeonholed into being the face of the brand or the marketing tool. Interesting quote.
So let's jump to 2008 when she founds a company called Parkwood Entertainment, which is named after the street that the Knowles' big White House had been on. So Parkwood is her kind of in-house production and management company. It produces the tours, the music, the films, the documentaries that will follow this move, and it also fronts most of the production costs. But this means it allows her to retain more back-end revenue.
Right.
She's no longer having the record label siphon it off. And so this decision was part one in Beyoncé becoming an independent woman.
Yeah. So again, that thing we've talked about before about very few people were going to write you a check just to do something like a salary or, you know, well done for doing this. You need to own the company like Oprah did with her production company. Part two of what you just said was part one came in 2011 when she announced that her father, Matthew, was no longer her manager. Now, according to Beyoncé's press release, they had split amicably. I've only parted ways with my father on a business level. He is my father for life, and I love my dad dearly. But a few months later, this version of events was called into question somewhat when Matthew filed a lawsuit against Live Nation Entertainment for turning his daughter against him.
Now, Matthew claimed that he was fired by Beyoncé. He alleged this was because Live Nation Entertainment had told her he'd stolen money from her, as in his own daughter. Quite the allegation. So Beyoncé had to then get a lawyer to conduct an audit, which allegedly concluded that Matthew had indeed taken money.
Now, we should say that Matthew, her dad, completely denied taking any money from his daughter and argued that Live Nation was lying with the goal of getting rights to Beyoncé's tour, something Live Nation denied. Ultimately, the lawsuit didn't seem to go anywhere. Live Nation and Beyoncé did not publicly comment on it, but probably worth noting, this was also around the same time that Matthew conceived a child with another woman during an 18-month affair, which led to him and Tina divorcing. We don't know if this contributed, but, you know, it probably didn't help. You know, tensions were clearly running high.
And this moment, I think, feels like a real turning point for Beyoncé because she's about to turn 30 years old. Big moment in anybody's life. She makes herself CEO of Parkwood Entertainment and she starts managing herself. She said, I felt like I wanted to follow the footsteps of Madonna and be a powerhouse and have my own empire and show other women when you get to this point in your career, you don't have to go sign with someone else and share your money and your success. You do it yourself. And just weeks after parting with her father, she releases a song that I mentioned, Run the World, Girls.
Okay. But business had to be put on hold the next year. Beyoncé had a miscarriage, describing it as the saddest thing I've ever been through. Beyoncé and Jay-Z, by the way, had married in 2008. And interestingly, in the modern world, no photographs from the wedding were leaked, which shows how impressively tight a lid they kept on that relationship. And she gave birth to her first daughter, Blue Ivy Carter, in 2012. And she described becoming a mother as the biggest accomplishment of my life. She would have twins 5 years later, by the way.
So shortly after Blue Ivy was born, Beyoncé filed an application to trademark her daughter's name. This began a legal battle that has been going on ever since, involving objections from a wedding planner. There was also a clothing brand who already held that name. According to Jay-Z, the reason was people wanted to make products based on our child's name, and you don't want anybody trying to benefit off your baby's name.
No, if anyone's going to do that, it's going to be me. That's right. Shade to the Beckhams here.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Or other kind of showbiz family dynasties where you can tell mum and dad are angling for their child to get into the same business.
Yeah.
And I think you can definitely see that, most recently, the most recent Met Gala, we saw Blue Ivy on the red carpet next to her mum.
Yeah, I think you should trademark your name. It's really cool.
Maybe.
I'm not sure.
Before
I'm not sure
anyone else
that's
does it first.
Trademarkable. But like many mothers, particularly driven ones like Beyonce, she got back to work very quickly. 4 months after giving birth, she performed 4 consecutive shows in Atlantic City. And she said, that was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Rehearsals started 3 months after I gave birth. I was nervous that I wouldn't feel the same. I think a lot of people coming back from childbirth think that. And when I still feel the need to work just as hard and I still felt the same release, I was like, okay.
Well, 2013 is the year that Beyoncé went stratospheric. She performed at the Super Bowl halftime show in front of 110 million viewers.
People don't know about American football. The halftime Super Bowl show is one of the biggest set pieces in the global entertainment calendar. People like Michael Jackson famously did it and caused a sensation. It's always a subject of great cultural, debate and analysis. For example, when Bad Bunny did it recently, it was a political storm, so it's a big deal, right?
Exactly. Well, artists actually, and this is interesting, they're not paid a performance fee for the halftime show, but she had actually just re-signed with Pepsi for an estimated $50 million, which included a halftime commercial. And Forbes described this deal as an unconventional multi-year deal because Beyoncé would have an element of creative control with a multi-million-dollar fund to support the singer's chosen creative projects, presumably including the Super Bowl.
Yeah, so every part of your Beyonce's life now is a product in a way. And that year she wrote, produced and directed and starred, of course, in a documentary called Life is But a Dream. And she's always stressed her hands-on approach. She was actually on Final Cut Pro, that software which you use to edit video. She said, I spent a year editing. I went through hundreds of shows worth of footage, and that experience taught me to love the filmmaking process. An early adopter then of this kind of self-execing, I'm thinking of Taylor Swift here as well.
Exactly. The Beckhams have done it recently as well. I know some documentary filmmakers who'd actually hate this kind of form of documentary filmmaking because they say if the talent or the subject gets to make the show, it's not really going to be truthful.
Yeah.
If Beyonce is on Final Cut Pro kind of editing together everything, is it going to be an objective portrait of the truth? Who knows?
Yeah, in journalism, everyone needs an editor, right? And that editor shouldn't be you. If you're
Unless
writing about yourself.
Unless maybe it's Beyonce. Beyonce can edit me anytime.
Okay. And that was the year she ripped up the music industry rule book. She dropped her 5th solo album, which was a visual album called Beyonce, totally out of the blue. And it broke the record as the fastest-selling album in iTunes history. And again, it was one of those things that must have been like this Manhattan Project. It must have been kept very secret because it would have been a big deal to release it from nowhere. I mean, David Bowie did this towards the end of his life. That's a different thing. He was not the kind of global superstar with everyone's eyes on him that Beyonce was at the time.
You can imagine the number of lawyers that Beyonce must have hired just to write the NDAs to keep everyone silent.
Yeah. It's interesting sort of study in control, isn't it? In an interview, the journalist from GQ magazine noted that Beyonce's ground rule was that she filmed everything. The tape would become part of her temperature-controlled archive, includes private footage compiled by a visual director that Beyonce employs who has shot practically her every waking moment, up to 16 hours a day since 2005. As GQ magazine said, ready to be summoned and monetized at the push of a button. So this is like a real-life Truman Show, isn't it?
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Except she's doing it to herself, consensually, willingly.
Yeah, exactly, rather than being ignorant of it.
That year, Beyonce went on a huge tour of 132 shows. And every night after performing, she'd apparently watch a DVD of a show that she'd performed. So she'd critique herself, her dancers, her cameraman. The next morning, everyone would receive pages of notes. And this, I think, attention to detail, which I think if you're on her team, must come with kind of like pulling your hair out stress. I mean, it brings results because gross revenue from that tour was $230 million. And that's, by the way, how much the tour brought in total, not her earnings from it.
Yeah, so we know how much she earned that year. Forbes estimated her earnings to be $115 million. And just breaking that down a bit, you've got the album sales. Her deal with Sony at the time was rumoured to be structured more like a joint venture. Usually you get a royalty rate around 20%. She was getting 50. Endorsements with Pepsi and H&M. She was making big money from her celebrity fragrances. Heat, Pulse, Rise. They were making tens of millions a year. Apparently, Heat has actually got 7 spin-off scents. Do you own any celebrity fragrances?
No, I have to admit, I was not one for the celebrity fragrance era.
I know. Anyway, so all of that adds up.
Yeah, exactly. So all this combined, Forbes named Beyonce the most powerful celebrity in the world that year based on the money she was earning and her fame. But she's only got about $250 million at this point, only.
Yeah.
Peanuts. So let us fast forward to 2016 for her next big business move.
Okay, first of all, the music. In 2016, she released Lemonade. Now, again, this was a surprise release, a fully visualized album, had lots of pictures with it. It was personal this time. It was all about the infidelity of her husband, Jay-Z. You'll remember this controversy better than I because it had lots of tongues wagging. What were they saying?
Oh my God, how do I even... This is a whole kind of odyssey that all the Beyonce fans had to go on, right? So basically...
I'm going to strap myself in.
Okay, get the popcorn. So basically, the Met Gala, one of the most highly public, big showbiz events organized by Vogue to raise money for the Met Museum in New York. Someone leaked footage of Solange, Beyonce's little sister, kicking and hitting Beyonce's husband, Jay-Z, in the lift. It's kind of wild because Solange doesn't just go for him once, she goes for him several times. And Beyonce sort of like in between two of them, but she sort of stood against the wall of the lift, not doing anything, which suggests he kind of maybe, approves. And everyone thinks this is because that was the night that Beyonce and Solange found out about this woman that she refers to on her album as Becky with the good hair, the woman that Jay-Z had been having an affair with.
Right, okay.
And so this became this whole kind of, for my money...
Feeding frenzy.
Exactly. And this is the first time you ever get a crack in Beyonce's perfect image, right?
Right, okay.
Where it's like her husband has cheated on her and she makes this album, Lemonade, all about that.
Okay, and people presumably absolutely loved it.
Oh, yeah. It was commercially a success, critically a massive hit. Critics loved it. It was included in every end-of-year list. It topped Rolling Stone's greatest albums of the 21st century. It even won a Peabody Award.
It actually outsold some other big names that year. We're talking about Adele, Kanye, Ye these days, Drake, Rihanna. Beat them all, and to support the album she went on the Formation Tour, playing 49 dates, the first ever all-stadium tour by a female artist. That's interesting. I thought Madonna might have done that before, but no. The tour grossed $256 million. That's $5 million every night.
Yeah, and I do remember seeing this, and this was a real phenomenon when it came to London. In 2016, she also made a major move into fashion. So she'd actually tried this before. In 2005, she launched a brand called House of Deréon with her mum, Tina, which was kind of denim, skirts, dresses. It started off okay, but in the early 2010s, House of Deréon was quietly shuttered. But then in 2016, she started tapping into the growing athleisure market.
Okay.
With a line called Ivy Park. And if you want to hear more about athleisure, you can check out our episode on Ben Francis, the Gymshark billionaire.
Gymshark. Okay, that's interesting. I have to say, House of Deréon, as names go, I'm not a fan.
No, yeah.
Ivy Park, much more like it. In fact, I remember the launch of that because every day when I come to work, I have to walk past the flagship store of Topshop. And it was all over. The branding of Ivy Park was all over that for months. And it was because she'd met with the owner, Sir Philip Green, another one of our billionaires. Check out that episode. And Beyonce said of him, I think he was originally thinking I wanted to do an endorsement deal like they've done with other celebrities where they just basically sign up, say, I wear you this other product. But I wanted a joint venture. I presented him with the idea, the mission statement, the purpose, marketing strategy, all in the first meeting. I think he was pretty blown away. And so he agreed to a 50-50 partnership. I mean, why wouldn't you want to be a partner with Beyonce at that time? Incredibly, that's like, you don't need much business acumen to say this might be a good thing. So they launched Ivy Park just a week before Lemonade came out with a big cover interview in some of the magazines, including Elle, selling that new line.
But in 2018, Beyonce bought Topshop out of that partnership after Philip Green was named as having taken legal action to prevent the publication of allegations of sexual harassment of staff. Accusations, by the way, that he categorically and wholly denies. Instead, in 2019, Ivy Park announced it was partnering with Adidas, and this was turning a bad situation into an opportunity because Adidas is the second richest sportswear company in the world. They offered her creative control. And meanwhile, Philip Green's Arcadia Group, which owned Topshop, was actually collapsing.
Boy, do I remember that. I was reporting on that a lot at the time, and often with late-night phone calls with Sir Philip himself. And it was true that at that time, Sir Philip Green was being called the unacceptable face of capitalism. He was a bit of a toxic brand. There's no way someone like Beyonce wanted to be hooked to that wagon at all. So there's no surprise that partnership broke up.
Absolutely.
But the Adidas one didn't last long either. In 2023, they mutually parted ways due to creative differences. Love that. Behind those differences, poor sales, though, they were down more than 50% to around 40 million in 2022, which is pretty bad for a business the size of Adidas, because they projected $250 million in sales. Ivy Park had been losing money for Adidas.
Oof.
Which is a surprise to me,
Yeah.
I must say. But there we go.
Not a good time for Adidas, but also not a problem for Beyonce because the original deal she signed guaranteed her about $20 million in annual compensation regardless of sales. Great fine print there. When the split was announced, it was said that Beyonce was excitedly looking to reclaim her brand. But I think we can safely say that, fashion is not Beyonce's route to $1 billion because Ivy Park has not operated since then.
So if that's not going to work, let's try something else. So she tried her hand at some other consumer brands. She launched a hair care brand called Sacred, that's C-E-acute, C-R-E-D, in 2024.
Although if people are struggling to pronounce it, perhaps not the best name for your brand.
Yes. It's hard to tell how successful that's been so far. It's reported estimates it's generating 200 million in annual revenue in the first year. But she chose, interestingly, not to be the face of this brand, saying, I made a conscious decision not to appear in the ads. The brand's first impression needed to stand on its own merit, not be swayed by my influence.
Interesting.
You've got influence like that? Why not use it? I think that's a really, really interesting departure.
Well, she's also launched a whiskey, which is called Sir Davis, named after her great-grandfather. This is a joint venture with Moet Hennessy, and it follows in the path of her husband, Jay-Z, who got into business with LVMH, who owned Moet Hennessy years ago. His champagne, Amand de Brignac, was the biggest contributor to him becoming a billionaire back in 2019 when Forbes estimated it was worth $310 million to him. But it remains to be seen whether or not Beyonce's whiskey will be as profitable.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I don't see Beyonce and whiskey as two things that go together, whereas I do see the bling of Jay-Z and champagne. I don't know. I could be totally wrong. What do I know? But it did work in one other way because the whiskey became part of Beyonce's cowboy era. Because in 2024, she released Cowboy Carter, the second in a trilogy of albums. The first was Renaissance, or Renaissance, as the Americans would say, in 2022. Again, critical commercial success. Beyonce had the power to sell with the ensuing cowboyification. And I have to say, I do remember this bit. Although I never went to one of her live shows, there was a period in London when everyone on the tube, wherever you went, was wearing boots and a cowboy hat and denim. I was like, what's going on? Is there some kind of country and western festival? And in a way, there was, because it was basically Beyonce's cowboy era.
Exactly. Well, I mean, unsurprisingly, brands also wanted to help Beyonce capitalize on this new aesthetic. Levi's paid her an estimated $10 million for a series of commercials, and she got an estimated $50 million for a special halftime show for Netflix's first Christmas Day NFL game.
Yeah, but unlike her husband Jay-Z and her contemporary Rihanna, it's like Rihanna with Fenty and what have you was a huge part of her billionaire status. Her fortune is kind of like a good old-fashioned musician's fortune, like Taylor Swift, is down to touring and the value of the music catalogue. That is massive.
Right, because Forbes also estimated her music catalogue had increased in value to $300 million. And through Parkwood Entertainment, she has significant ownership and control over her master recordings, especially from her self-titled 2013 album onward.
And remember how important that is, because Taylor Swift went to the lengths of re-recording her original album so that she owned the masters of, the Taylor's version. So that's a huge part of their wealth, because that's an asset which keeps on giving. Every time it's used in an advert, every time it's played on the radio, every time whatever, some money drops on the mat for many, many years. And so you can actually kind of work out the value of what the future revenues would be at the time. That adds up to a lot of money and a big part of these people's wealth.
Exactly. And there's so many people making money off of historic, older albums, tracks, songs right now. It's something that private equity has also started injecting itself into.
Because in the old days, you go in and buy an album. Let's say you bought, Writings on the Wall or whatever. your financial relationship with that band could be over at that point. But with streaming, you know that you're going to keep getting bits of money for years to come, and therefore it becomes a whole different kind of financial creature.
Exactly. And even after you die, you
Yeah.
probably get an even bigger bump in the amount of revenue you get from that.
Yeah, and so by the end of 2023, she was worth 800 million. You add in Cowboy Carter in 2024, that tour made 400 million ticket sales, 50 million merchandising. So all of that meant by the end of 2025, Forbes declared Beyonce a billionaire worth $1 billion.
But what next for Beyonce? She said, I can only work on what liberates me. It's fame that can at times feel like a prison. So when you don't see me on red carpets and when I disappear until I have art to share, that's why.
Sometimes you've had to create, you rinse it a bit too much, and it's hard for her to fly much higher. So let's see how her altitude in terms of fame and earning power goes from here.
Well, remember, she's currently in the middle of recording that trilogy of albums. Cowboy Carter was the second one.
Yeah.
The rumor is that the third album will be a rock album.
Wow.
So it could come out at any minute. It could be a surprise drop.
Okay.
So we will see how Beyonce does rock and roll.
Okay, I'm looking
Watch this space.
Watch this space. That is the Beyonce Knowles story so far. So now it's time to score Beyonce on some categories. Just a bit of fun. What we do is we take categories wealth, power, controversy, legacy, and we score them between 0 and 10, a bit like a sort of top trumps card game. So let us start with wealth.
Well, I mean, she's not particularly high on the wealth stakes, right? So she's currently about 3,300th in the world today, but there are very few music billionaires. Obviously, Taylor Swift is one of them, but all in, there's probably less than 10 in the world.
Yeah. She came from a bit of money. Often we talk about how far they come from rags to riches. So we know that she started out in a very comfortable, pretty successful middle-class household in Houston. But boy, she knows how to spend it, doesn't she? In 2023, her and Jay-Z spent $200 million for a Malibu beachfront mansion, which we think is the highest price ever paid for a property in California. And you're up against some pretty stiff competition in California.
I mean, you're up against what? Movie stars.
And also, of course, as a couple, they liked to flash the cash, didn't they? They were the power couple, weren't they?
I mean, you could do an entire podcast about how those two as a couple have navigated getting older together and having kids, right? Because she was so young when they met. He was older. He came from, we've done the episode on him. He literally came from the housing projects of New York.
Yeah.
And she comes from this nice middle class background. How those two have continued to go on and create a business despite the infidelity, despite Becky with the good hair, and had 3 kids. I mean, it's really intriguing. But yeah, they do love to spend it too.
Okay, so let's give them a wealth rating. She's entry level for our purposes because it's only just crept into the billionaire category. So not that. But on the kind of lifestyle and the aspirational stuff and the way they flaunt it, I'm going to give them a 5. Give her a 5.
I feel like as someone who spent personally quite a lot of money on Beyonce tours, I feel like I have to give her slightly more. So maybe I'll give her a 6 out of 10.
Okay. What about controversy? I mean, one of the most written about women in history, probably. A lot of think pieces about whether she's a feminist or not. Discussed.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because obviously she'd had that whole run the world girls era where, I mean, the lyric is literally girls, we run the world. She stood in front of a giant screen that basically said feminist and included spoken words from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's We Should All Be Feminists essay. If you remember that and you can, look it up, it's at the VMAs. And there is an argument to be had that, Beyonce is this feminist icon. She's shown young women and girls, especially black women, that you can be the star, you can be the mogul in the same way that Jay-Z is.
Yeah, not just the star, but the mogul. That's an important distinction, isn't it?
Right, the black Bill Gates, basically.
Yeah.
But then, there's also a strand of feminism that says, actually, all you're doing is kind of kowtowing to the temple of capitalism at the end of the day. You're just telling people that you can do it through, hard work, through making money, when that maybe isn't how society is set up, especially not for people of color.
Yeah.
So I think it's an ongoing tension in her work, really. I think Beyonce, when you listen to her, when you read her interviews, she has a pretty, strong idea of, what her feminism consists of. I mean, she said, I'm not really sure people know or understand what a feminist is, but it's very simple. It's someone who believes in equal rights for man and woman. Ask anyone, man or woman, do you want your daughter to have 75 cents when she deserves $1? What do you think the answer would be?
Okay.
I think that's pretty dead on.
Okay, fair enough.
I think the whole controversy over whether Beyonce is a feminist or an arch capitalist, Honestly, it just depends on which side of the coin you land on.
Yeah. Controversy. Some would say ruthless. We use that word sometimes. I mean, if you look at the Destiny's Child era, there was chopping and changing. I mean, her dad saying wanting to put her front and centre. I go and see, people with their kids in the football pitch on a Sunday afternoon, and every dad wants their son to be centre forward. No one wants them put in goal. Apologies to goalies out there. But do you know what I mean? I don't think that a parent angling to put their talented daughter somewhere front and centre in this thing, given that you've given up your job for it, I don't think that's entirely surprising, so I'm not going to blame them for that. She fired her dad as her manager, but we've seen that before in these things.
Exactly.
So I'm going to give her quite a low score for controversy. I'm going to give her a 3.
I think I would give her a 2 out of 10 in the grand, good, bad billionaire stakes.
3 for me, 2 for you. Okay, power.
If she called up the White House, would the president pick up? Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Any president.
Mr. President, Beyonce on line 1, you take it, wouldn't you?
Oh, 100%. The president of any country, I think.
Yeah, for
which
sure.
is quite a feat.
Also, she, in terms of her economic power, she can influence whole nation's economic statistics when her entourage comes to town. I think it's in Sweden. Tickets for her show and hotel bookings sparked such a frenzy that Sweden reported higher than expected inflation. Visit Stockholm described the boom in tourism to the city as the Beyonce effect.
Yeah, not a million of miles away from Swiftonomics, which is the exact same thing which happened when Taylor Swift's Eras tour rolled into town in various cities around the world.
And can she influence things like fashion? I mean, her forays into fashion didn't work that well, but she can influence the look for Cowboy Carter.
Exactly. I mean, my God. I don't think I've ever seen as many cowboy boots as I did when Beyonce's tour rode into town.
Yeah. So power, I'm going to give her a pretty high rating. I'm going to give her 7.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give her higher. I think I'm going to give her an 8 out of 10. When you not only become, is it a mononym where you're just first name only, like Cher, Madonna, Beyonce?
Yeah. Or even a letter.
Exactly. Or B. That says a lot about the amount of power you have.
Legacy. She holds a lot of records.
Yeah. So most number of Grammy wins ever. 35, which is kind of crazy. Mm-hmm. Obviously she's been a huge figure in the Black community. She's been called incredibly influential. She's been cited as being inspiring within, beyond music alone. It kind of also, I think, popularized feminism among people who might not have embraced it before.
Okay.
She said, you see my husband, Jay-Z, and you see these male artists that become moguls, and the female artists might become legends, but there's not enough of us that become moguls, and I think there are many ways to get there.
Okay, interesting distinction between legend and mogul, like owning the rights to production, as we talked about. So legacy, we'll be talking about Beyonce for as long as my lifetime is, the long as I've got left.
Oh, 100%.
So yeah, legacy, pretty high. 9?
Oh, yeah, I think 9 out of 10.
Okay, she gets 9 out of 10 from both of us. So, final reflections. There's not that many pop stars that push through to every walk of life, so that you would have to be living under a very big rock, indeed, not to know who they were, have some familiarity with their work, appreciate their influence on society. She's a superstar in every way.
I think that if I did the kind of single ladies dance where you're like, people know that.
Yes.
And that is incredible.
Yeah.
For something to cut through
Yeah.
that deeply into society, into the world, into culture. Very few people manage to do that consistently. And I think Beyonce is one of them.
Yeah. The final question, of course, is for you. Is Beyonce good, bad, or just another billionaire? What do you think?
So you can email goodbadbillionaire@bbc.com or drop us a WhatsApp on 001 917 686 1176 to tell us what you think about Beyonce.
And don't forget to include your name, as we may read out your message in a future episode.
We also want to hear from you if you have personally had any encounters with billionaires. We actually heard from one listener who remembers a billionaire's carpet being so thick and luxurious it was like stepping on a cloud. Are you the groomer to a doggy owned by a billionaire? Have you sold a billionaire some bling? Are you a private jet pilot?
Yeah.
These guys have the good stories.
Have you signed an NDA? If not, we want to hear from you.
Please do get in touch. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss an episode.
And if you're watching in the UK and would like to listen to more episodes of Good Bad Billionaire, just follow the link in the description.